Right, this is going to be my first ever Thorin Side Patreon Ask Me Anything, AMA, number 1. Now, look, if you know how time works, you'll obviously understand this should have been out a while ago. But here's my way I do things. I could have just put an update or in the meantime said, I may have lost something. But the problem with that approach, in my opinion, which is the normal creator approach, you'll notice it's just too easy to fob people off, isn't it? Like if in that scenario you have extenuating circumstances that mean you can't do it, then actually, how can you know that you will deliver it? Like, but don't worry guys, I'll do it immediately or like next week or so. How can you know that? And in this case, because it's the first one on my side Patreon, you actually haven't seen yet that I can deliver, that I've got the track record. So what I want to do instead was get it done like now, deliver it, and then I can explain essentially why I couldn't do it, because it's not about excuses, more it's about accountability. Basically, over Christmas, I had a period where for, I would say, a semi-extended period, I've never had one this long, I was just ill. It was just incredibly hard to basically do any work. If you notice, the fact I did a lot in December meant I was stored up for my main channel, but it meant, this is the key thing, I've learned from my main Patreon on my AMA, on my main channel, that the problem was I would often leave it till I had like a day where it was like, whatever. Like that's one of the easier things to do, isn't it? You just answer the questions. But I found if I did that, actually, I'd often pick a time when I was in a bit of a bad mood or I hadn't slept that well, or I've got something like 2 hours I'm thinking about a bit. So instead for this one, especially for the side Patreon, I want to actually make it, because people are sending me really big questions, ones that they really care about, not just frivolous game questions. I want to make it so every time I'm doing it with legit energy. I'm actually doing it when I'm up for it and I want to talk about these topics, and I'm not just sort of like, I'll answer it. Like, look, I'm pretty epic at answering my AMA questions anyway, but I want to make this one, let's get started the right way. And then you'll see, again, I won't make promises. Just look in the next couple of weeks what comes in terms of other content on the channel, other top X lists and videos about things I'm interested in. So if you are someone who wants to support this side channel, I have my Patreon. At the very end of the video, there'll be a little thing saying some of the perks. You can obviously go there, Thorin Side. Similarly, if you're someone who hasn't got any money or you're just not able to support in that way, just liking the video with thumbs up, writing a comment, subscribe to the channel. These things all help. They all help the algorithm. They're all good. So, obviously, we're going to start out. I'm assuming for these ones, people don't mind the name being read out, right? If that's not the case, let me know next time and we'll maybe not say the name. But Jack says, hi Thorin, do you have any advice on how you might combine seemingly unconnected skills to create a niche? I think I might know a thing or two about that, really. I don't know if you know this, but I used to be the best text-based interviewer in esports. Then I combined that with like reading people's body language skills and like communication. It's almost like a form of interpreting in English. Then I added that in with like comedy. Then I added that in with concepts like show running, other things. I don't know, I've even been a guest. I sort of know the space. Okay, you come to the right place here. How do you attract or get the attention of those who may be seeking out what you have to offer? Okay. Oh, and then he basically just says a very nice thing, which is like, he just thanks me for all the hours of content and all the stuff. And he says, he hopes it's not cliche to say that my commitment to principles and truth inspiring, which is cool. Okay, cheers. Right, thank you for the message. What I would say is this. The key thing here is these are two different questions. When you say, well, one's a sort of a question. When he says, do you have an advice on how you may combine them? Yes, I do. So this general topic in general, like, because you want to combine the skills, but you have a reason. You want to attract the interest of people who want the things that you can potentially offer, right? So first things first, think out what you're saying there. What you're saying is you want people to either hear about your content and want to come see it, or see your content and be like, this is the stuff I want. So what you're going to have is content that's good and unique to you. Because what you need to be is this. If someone wants Thorin content, they can't just go and watch a bad The Score esports. They can't go and watch someone else's thought. It won't be Thorin content. There's only one game in town. But that's not something I could have said at the beginning of my career. I've done a few generic things back in the day, or simpler things. It took a while to develop that because I had to get good first. So step one, get good. Put in hours. Try a lot of things. Fail many times. Try all different angles. Remember, when you're getting good, you don't know what you're good at. So try a bunch of things. And when you're bad at them, keep going and see if that becomes something you're good at. Or see if it's something you're just hitting your head against a brick wall. Crucially, what will draw you in this sense is you don't want to feel like you're pushing yourself to do it. I should do it. You want to feel like you're drawn to it. Like, I really want to do that. Even if I'm bad, I want to just give it a go. So I would say this, get fascinated. Find something you're curious about within the area you think you're interested in, or you think your initial skill set may, and get really fascinated with it. Get fascinated as to why you're not that good now, why the other people are better than you, what it takes to improve even a tiny bit. See that progress, not just each day. You're going to see it like weeks at a time or months out. You're going to look back, years out. You're going to look back and go, wow, I'm so much better. I thought I just gradually barely improved. I'm way better than I was a year, 6 months ago. You want to do that. Also, as you're learning these main things and working on what might be your main skill, your main area and your stack of talent, as it were, add complementary skills. So, for example, you like writing, then I would suggest doing something like take a course online or start watching videos about how do you appreciate literature or what is concise writing, or maybe read like The Art of Style or whatever that classic book is about like the way you write and how to look like you have great writing etiquette, or do some sort of a course in poetry and find out how to sort of tap into those aspects. Look up concepts like magical realism and how to include these epic elements within your work. If you're into video, learn some video editing skills. Look at other content. Look at video essays in totally different areas. There's a key skill, by the way. Look at totally different areas, but then with a view to like, what are they doing there? What's vital there? What's interesting there? And can I take the skill or style or format, or is there something inspirational over there that I can bring into my area here and do it this way? If you knew how many great pieces of content and great conversation points and interview questions and so on were just from my interests in other areas. I mean, the joke is that's why this channel exists and why people are interested, because they always knew, lurking behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on than just esports, right? I've lived a life. I'm almost 40 years old now. I will be in a few months. So I would just say, yeah, take that approach. And then in terms of how you attract those people, look, do all that first. And here's the key thing. As long as you're not a dickhead to people, eventually they will come. It really is. If you build it, they will come. In esports, the way I survived so long, because I wasn't a popular person for many years, is I always thought to myself this: there's 5 guys out there who are big decision makers, and I just need them to think my work has value, them to want my work, them to be interested in working with me. I don't need the fans to. I don't need this guy I like as a player to approve of it. I don't think, oh, should you have this job? And other people, oh, yeah, he's better than me. No, I don't need any of that. Actually, those 5 people. So every time I got fired or I left the company or I had some issue, I would just need to know, who's my next one of those 5 guys? Is it a team owner? Is it a guy at a TO? Is it someone at a game dev? Is it someone with an independent company? Is it a legendary esports figure? Is it a newer esports figure? Is it some pro player who wants to collab with me in some way, or some up-and-coming talent? I would just look for those people. So I'll say, as you go, the way will unfold before you, and you will start to find these people. And the better you get, and the more you build a brand of your own, which, by the way, essentially just means figure out what you're doing, who you are, what you want to do, what you're good at, what you're working on, shore up some of the weaknesses, work on the strengths, and present that like, this is who I am, this is what I do. Figure out your brand. I'd also say, as a side, cross-promote. If you find other small content or medium-sized content creators who are doing your sort of stuff, cross-promote. Have them come on a show with you, do an interview with them, you go on their show afterwards, you do an interview with them, cross-promote each other's channels. Every now and then you do a little show to get, there's loads of ways. It's even fun, because if no one watches at the beginning, you're just learning with your mates and getting going. If people start to watch, you start building the brand, figuring out what it is. Don't read comments too much, because a lot of the comments are the vocal minority who don't like your work and wouldn't actually even know how to tell you make it better. Figure it out for yourself with yourself, your colleagues. What I'd say primarily, evaluate your own work and evaluate better work than yours. There's the last thing I'll say. Always be consuming as much really high level work that's way better than yours, both in that field and other fields, as you can, because it'll mean you'll never get complacent. I've never sat in esports and thought, like, I am by far the best, so I could probably just chill, because then I'll turn and like read a Christopher Hitchens book and go, bloody hell, I've got to fucking step my shit up in terms of writing. Better get back to the grindstone. I can't go, I'm the best interviewer of all time. I am, by the way, in esports. It's not even a debate, in my opinion, because here's the problem. You look at some of the all-time great interviewers that have ever worked in any field. There are some very special people in those areas. That's very interesting. Now, I will say that's one area where maybe I can fuck with them, but that's what this channel is going to have to prove, isn't it? I haven't proven that yet. I've only done it in esports, little kids' video games. So I would say that, yeah, always let that be pushing you forwards. Spoon-fed 89. What is happiness or joy? I would say a simple answer would be, I would say they are feelings that emerge out of certain experiences. And I say that very carefully, because to me, they are just feelings. They're not actually like a state of mind. They're not like, oh my God, I am happy. That means always. It's like, it's a fleeting thing, isn't it? Like, one of the great things about happiness and joy is when you have them in that moment in your hand, it feels like fucking awesome, isn't it? But that's why I want to use that analogy. Do you know the analogy where it's like, if you see a beautiful flower, part of what makes it beautiful is that you just let it be and you observe it and you enjoy it, but then you don't go, let me pick it and take it away with me. And this is mine. It's mine, my precious. Only I will see the flower. Because it'll all just wither away in your hands, won't it? It'll disappear. And the second you pick it, it's not alive anymore. You see what I mean? You don't want to be like that in that sense. You don't want to be greedy with happiness and joy. In the same way as, that's why I always say, this too shall pass is the greatest line to remember ever. When you're too happy, it'll tell you, enjoy. Because there's going to come days where you won't be. When you're really down, it feels like it's going to last forever. Nah, it'll turn around. Something will happen. Even if you're depressed, you'll have a day where you meet a friend you didn't think of, or something will happen. It'll distract you for a little while. You'll laugh and see a silly comedy thing for an hour. There's always something in that particular way. So I would say the key thing to me is to understand its feelings. Now, the problem with men is a lot of men have gone this angle of like, because it's just feelings, it's not like an objective fact in the world. I mean, in a way, it is. It's just internalized to you and subjectively experienced. They think that means it's valueless, and the only things that matter is like logic and reason. No, you've got your inner psyop yourself, mate. If you make fun of the women where it's like feelings over facts, lol, it's like you're the guy where it's like facts only, feelings don't exist, they are for morons. They're definitely not. And by the way, if you ever want to interact with children, women, and old people who no longer have any vital force in themselves, you better understand feelings. You better know how to cater to those feelings. You better know when it's appropriate to respond in certain ways. And I would say, if you care about those people, you better be compassionate. Like the fact that that person's wrong or they're arguing in a way you think is silly, if you just dismiss that and go, but I don't care that they feel bad about it, then you're the monster. You're the heartless one. You're the one who doesn't give a flying fuck about them. What? Because they're not right about something. That's the way a young idiot thinks. I was that young idiot once, but that is the way a young idiot thinks. And you won't know you're an idiot, sadly, until later in your life, because you're picking that one reductive factor and they're not meeting the mark. Oh, and what a coincidence. It makes you be the one aggrandized. You got to check yourself when you see that. So what I would say is this. I would say those terms are used too loosely, and I think people use them in a very silly way. I mean, it's like the word love, isn't it? I always say this, right? Anyone who thinks like saying something simple like, I love you, is cliched. Well, it is, because it's been said a billion times, and in bad faith and disingenuously, or just by people who didn't know what love was, that it means that everyone's seen it in movies and heard it in books and read it in books and all that a million times, the songs and everything, and they've even said it and they've thought it, and before they knew what love is, they've said. But I tell you what, the moment you actually are in love and someone says to you, I love you, it won't be the same thing as three little words. It won't. It will hit you like a fucking Mack truck. So I would say similarly, don't ever take these things as frivolous or they're meaningless. Just because they're fleeting, they are still some of the best and most important experiences a human being can ever have, in my opinion. And I would say, quite frankly, I don't necessarily know that it's the case that like, I think the mistake is, it's not that these are the things you chase after, like I said. I think they're byproducts of experiences, of how you live your life, of how you actually encounter different circumstances. Like, for example, I'll tell you a similar thing. One of the ways I've been finding a lot of happiness is when I learn something new, or I overcome an enemy, or I shore up a weakness. I don't think, I should have done that years ago. Oh, bloody hell, beat myself up. Like, it's taken me this long to learn it. I go, I'm so grateful I've learned it now. Now I'm going to level up. Now I'm not going to make those mistakes again. They'll never catch me again like that. I'm so grateful to have learned it now. Maybe I took longer than other people. Who cares? My style is once I know it, I start leveling up. I'll beat you guys. You guys had the head start. Sorry, I'm one of the best coming from behind of all time. No fucking pause. So yeah, I just think it's used too loosely. Like, Panda, do you have any familiarity with the Abra Melon or similar rituals? And if yes, would you be willing to share any insights about them? Right, this is a big topic and one that I don't take lightly. And I will say, I've been like maybe you and other people in the past. If you go back, I mean, actually, even back in the early 2000s, I was interested in some of this stuff. Yeah, I was someone who maybe too loosely threw some of these things around or referenced them or implied I knew stuff about them, because I did know some things, but I was a dilettante. I was something getting into, or I was interested in it, or I had a different perspective. Like at the time I was doing that whole thing, like a lot of people, like the atheist thing of like, well, since like like religion's bad anyway, like all the people who were against it must have had something there. They were sort of heroes. And then, obviously in this area, like they were showing that there's a different way. And maybe this is like how psychology developed and how hypnotism developed and how modern day, chemistry. No, I was on that tip. And here's the problem with that. That's a psyop too. That's a mistake too. What I will say is this. This is my advice only to myself, but you're listening to my advice. I never talk about that stuff online in any detail. I actually think, by the way, it's bad enough when people talk about it in real life with normies / their friends. Like, again, it would be like not knowing anything about snowboarding and have done like a little bit of snowboarding and like you're watching videos online and then telling your friend about some super dangerous route and how cool it is and all that. And then he might go and try it and then die. And you go, well, I didn't tell him to try it. It's like, nah, but you know what, mate? You bear some level of responsibility for the influence, right? Look, he bears the ultimate one. But you're not totally without any fucking sin in that regard. And I tell you what, I bet you'd regret it, right? If you died. And also you'd think, oh, maybe I should have known what I was talking about more. If people don't know, on my Discord, which if you're a Patreon here, you get access to, one of the things I always say in our food lifestyle channel is, don't come in here and just say what you've heard. I've heard this is good. This guy does this. Come in and tell us what you've done, how it worked for you, and why it worked for you. That's what we want. We want actual fucking skin in the game. We don't want bozos just being a fucking like repeating station for some other shit they heard from. I heard this is good. How do you know? I don't care what you bloody heard. What have you done? If it's nothing, shut the fuck up and let someone else talk. So what I would say is this: I cannot recommend you do this or even look into this area because it is a very complicated area. If you think it's simple because you know a bit, you've been tricked as well. You've already gone past the first step, and that's part of how it's designed. I would say the absurd layers of meaning are almost impossible to comprehend when you're just as someone on the outside, a dilettante looking in, or you've done, a fucking Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram, just a few of the simple ones that you've read the first 2 Israel Regardie books or something. You cannot at all think you can project that out and know what you're doing. So I'm not saying don't do it, notice. I never said don't look into it. But I tell you what, let it totally be upon your head. Let it be you who chooses it all. Never let it be my recommendation. I'll never recommend that. I'll never recommend stuff like that for anyone. I'll never recommend diet for people in that regard. It's only what worked for me and what I do. So what I would say is this. I would say the layers of meaning are almost Joycean. Like it seems like those symbols in those systems are so powerful in nearly all religious and mythological systems that each very strong intellect that comes along also seems to make connections and make interpretations that the others didn't. So there's also not like one way to do. So my problem is this. I think every level of those things reveals a new lens or a new meaning to the same thing. Imagine like in the optometrist or whatever, where they go like, is this one? And what about this? Is this better or is this? Now, obviously in real life, you just go, I can bloody tell the difference. But we all know it's because he's fine-tuning it. Same thing. Like you get, some of them make certain things look great in one way, but then the other one looks great in a different way, and then this one looks great in a fuzzy way, and then this one looks terrible. And I could sort of say, they're all different lenses. And is one lens the best one? Depends what you want it for, right? Some people have glasses that let them read close. Some people just want to see. There's all sorts of angles. So I would say there's a lot of compartmentalization going on in these fields as well. There's a lot of people, you're going to get to their level, and they're going to tell you this is what's really going on. And they don't know in the next level, there's a new layer to it. And sometimes the joke is, especially in these orders and doing some of these rituals, they start as one thing, which might be like, this is a little bit dark. Oh, this isn't that bad. It's got like a beautiful side to it, and people have interpreted the symbols differently. That's the real thing. The normies don't know. Wait a minute, there's a darker level, and behind that there's another thing they didn't tell you until you got to the next one. But then maybe it's not so bad because some of the people here, but then there's an even worse one, and maybe that connects into some really disturbing thing. That's what it's like, and it never ends, by the way. That's why they say like a good initiation never ends. It's like it starts, and then everything in your life from then onwards, there's some sort of journey where you're drawn towards a certain point, seemingly, right? I think anyone who thinks that all that info is leaked anyway, and you could just get a book off the internet, or you could download it, look, it shows all the rituals and stuff. You don't know how marketing works. I don't think it's a coincidence, those things. And don't come and go, no, but actually they didn't want to. You're just repeating stories. You're telling anecdotes, mate. What I'm talking about here is, I think it's intentional they leak that stuff out. Because it's like leaking the manuals to a car to get people who might want to drive cars to come and be interested, but people who've never driven a car before. And they actually don't know that, like, just being able to drive a car basically doesn't make you a Formula 1 driver. It doesn't make you super skilled. It doesn't mean you can get everything out of the car. It doesn't mean you know what you're doing even in that sense, right? It's multi-layered. It's so complicated. So essentially, I won't answer if I've been involved with that or similar rituals. I have certainly looked into and had some practical experience within this space. But the problem is, I don't want to be the guy who tells you, go for it. No, figure it all out yourself on that one. Certainly you're welcome to ask questions like that, by the way, but that is a question that's too far. I don't answer certain personal stuff in the same way as I wouldn't answer certain things about my private life, right? I'll also say this as well. I've got a few other angles for you. There was a quote along these lines that I took for you. It said, it is one characteristic of the study of true occult science that it may be explained to all men like parables, so dear to the ancients, it appears to many only the expression of the flight of a bold imagination. So think about that. The whole point of it is, to a normal person, it's just supposed to seem like some silly thing, or they don't really believe that, or it just means this one thing. It just means the sun. It's not really anything sinister at all. Or like, well, actually what it means is being a better person, sort of believing in yourself instead of bowing to a god or something. That's actually how it's designed. And the key thing is this: don't be such a fool. You think there's two levels. So many esports journalists will never be on my level because of this. They think there's the exoteric, the people outside, the dumb normies, and then there's the esoteric insider. There's a million layers of being an insider. They're matryoshka dolls. And so there are some like journalists who win Journalist of the Year award. They think they're the insider. Well, then why are you hitting up my DM to explain a business principle to you? Why are you hitting up me to ask what's going on with that? Who, do you know anything about that? How would I know, right? We're both equals. We're both on the inside, because there are layers to it. And I can tell you the entire principle, if you don't know, the most basic principle of all occult orders goes like this: exoteric aspect, esoteric aspect, inner order. Now, that's just the basic three. If you even get to that point in the bigger order, I think it keeps going in. That's part of how, using compartmentalization, much like a military, etc., they're able to accomplish certain things and certain goals, because what you want is you want someone else to be thinking they're accomplishing a goal that helps them, which secretly helps you, because they're the profane and you're the sacred. The obvious thing would be, remember that Rick and Morty episode where he makes an entire civilization, introduces electricity to them, and then the premise is like they think he's like a god who's made their culture, and their whole society was just to make generate the energy to fuel his like car battery or something. Like, there's an element of that. And also, that's the last reason I'll say this, is if you're one of those dilettantes, like, it's just a game, like, lol, you can just do whatever you want, like, nothing's really going to happen, then no one wastes their time doing that if they don't believe at all. On some level, you hope there's something there. And I'll tell you what, if you fuck around with that like that, if you're one of those guys like, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll go to a churchyard all on my own, I'll take LSD, I'll read all these really scary, dark shit about sacrifices and stuff, and then I'll pray and I'll meditate that a demon will come. If you do that, mate, best case scenario, you're a dickhead who wasted his time. Let's not go into what the worst case scenario is. Might not even be that any of those things are actually real in any external, tangible fact. But I tell you what, once part of your brain believes in it, your brain can make it real. Your brain can make everything real in your imagination, in your mind. And guess what? Anyone who knows about psychedelics knows something being real in your imagination can overpower the feeling of being real in real life. It can be worse. It can be more intense. It can be stronger. And you can't shut it off in the same way as you could leave a room in real life if you didn't like who was in there. So what I would say is this: there are lots of elements that I think you have to consider before you go deep into these areas, but beyond just like checking out the little things or things that are complementary to other things like mythology that you're interested in. Like oaths. One thing I would say is this: oaths are no joke. They're not just something, I just said something to that guy and he agreed and, you have to say it again in the group. No. Oaths themselves potentially invoke or summon certain energies and forces and influences. They can be very dangerous stuff. You made a promise. You bound yourself, in this particular case, certain oaths. You're actually binding like your spirit, your life, your soul. You're the one saying that stuff, so that means something to you. That meant something. You put that into that equation. So I would say check out the Owen Cyclops interview. I think that's a pretty interesting one on this channel. I would also say in general, don't sort of like in a touristy manner fuck around with other people's religions. I think that's a really big mistake. One thing I actually found was an interesting piece of advice from the occult space is like, the one you should probably pick if you want to get into is something from your tradition, right? Something that has history with your people, your country, your culture, your ancestors. Might not even be from this realm, by the way, but something that has a real connection to you. Not just going into someone else's space that doesn't really make sense. I'm not talking about cultural appropriation. I'm talking about the vibe is, if it was real and this was somehow to do with like entity, then maybe they don't acknowledge you under those terms. That would be like trying to speak French, going to meet someone and they're like, are you really French? What the? That sort of thing can happen. And especially in that case, you're just going to be you're the guy who's just learned it on Duolingo. Now, you've never lived there, but so suddenly you can't even navigate the space. So your tradition, whether you know it or not, wherever you're from, you're probably embedded in that. It's part of the makeup of everything you do, as Christianity is for England, for example. And finally, I'll just say, like I said before, it's not a game. It's not a pornography, which is why I'm careful at this question, for you to just hear all the gory details and get like a little thrill here on what I've done and what I've been up to and what I thought, was it crazy? Dabblers in this area get fucked. You know the ones who don't? The ones who are just lazy and idiots anyway. The ones who just read a book or bought a book and pretended to read it, never did anything. Those guys get fucked. Like, that's the only thing that saves most of those people, in my opinion, is that they are too lazy to just follow the instructions and do what they're told. Because there's a lot of stories, way too many. Think this through. If this stuff all made your life great and better and awesome, why would so many fucking people make their lives shit when you see the outcome, and be in mental asylums. And I've thought, the amount of stuff, it's really sad. Like one of the most famous things when people make entity contact is they just get told. It's like if you went on the internet without knowing that it's just like random people out there that you can't trust, like your granddad or something. Oh, the hell, he's telling me online to click this link. That's what it's like potentially in some of this contact. And some of the things they love to tell you is, oh, you're special. You're the chosen one. Like they'll tell you all that shit. There's a million people with that story. They're not all just mad, by the way. That's something I think. Or maybe that's what being mad in that way is. That's an interesting angle, right? So I would just say, yeah, be very careful in this regard. Consider this. Being someone who has to teach yourself to drive, what car would you start in? How much theory would you do? What initial exercises would you do before you hit the highway? Think of it that way. John Livingston. According to Herbert, seek freedom and become captive of your desires. Seek discipline and find your liberty. What practices have deepened your ability to concentrate or streamlined your sensitivity towards knowing the way broadly? The obvious ones would just be, I have actually focused a lot on what are my interests, what interests me, what makes me curious. Let's follow that. I always say it's like a ball of yarn. Like I just follow that, like I'm Theseus in the labyrinth. And that just gets me, I never know where I'm going, but I seem to always end up somewhere interesting. And then along the way, I don't consider random coincidences and things. I think they very rarely are random. In fact, I almost don't believe in coincidence. I think coincidence is just a bad explanation for something that happened. You're just copping out. I think there's synchronicities. So what I watch out for are synchronicities. When I'm getting interested in a thing and then suddenly it pops up here and there and then this person in the podcast, I start following that through and I go, oh, this is a sign. See what's going on there. Is this something I'm supposed to be in? If I have a scenario where like I was trying to do this and in some way it like keeps going in a certain set, maybe there's a sign there. Maybe I'm swimming against the stream there. Maybe I can just flow with the stream somewhere else and get to where I wanted to be anyway via a different route, right? I would also say along the lines of intuition, which I think is a massive thing. Listen to your intuition. Develop it. Start to question, is that my intuition? Is that like a desire? Is that lost? What is that? And over time, in the same way as someone who starts to meditate eventually realizes, wait a minute, who is the person listening to me? Now, so was that me or am I the one listening? In the same way as you have that experience, you'll have that with intuition eventually. So initially you might just think, it's just a silly thought. No, that's why you have to tune into it like a radio station. If you want real life things to try, meditation's an obvious one. I would just do some simple things. I would get like mindfulness in plain English or something. Flotation tank's one of my favorites. Look, don't have expectations for it. It takes a few times to do it, but it's like going to sleep. Eventually your brain just learns how to do it and you get better and better and better at doing it in theory, right? So for that one, it just gets really good. And eventually at minimum, you have like very spaced out things or very relaxing things, or you're off in your imagination. You can actually have it, by the way, where like a dream, you lose memory of your body because you're in the water and you are off in something, having experience, and then suddenly you hear that, oh, it's time to come up. Whoa, I'm in the tank. Oh, that's a fucking amazing feeling. That can happen totally sober, by the way. Spoiler, if you've done it a few times and it gets to a certain level and you want it to go higher, if you were to smoke a certain something before you went in, and you can do the basic thing of getting into the, I can tell you, you're going to think that it's just weed or whatever. No, you're going to blast off out of this fucking realm. You will be in another dimension, homie. You will think very differently about yourself. Yeah, let's just say that's one. So cannabis is obviously a potential thing you could try there. I'm not recommending it. I've tried it though and I liked it. So, other things like keto diet I found interesting for that. I found it made my brain think in sort of a more almost efficient way, and the way it made me learn about energy was very interesting. Similarly, fasting, which sort of goes along with that. I find that that's something that sort of teaches you about how you concentrate, what types of brain energy they are, what times during the day things work a certain way, how you can concentrate, how sensitive you are to certain aspects. Just generally reducing sugar and carbs. I think you're going to make you feel less shitty, less distracted, less up and down spiking. Walking's a great one. There's a bunch of different ways of walking. You're going to think, no, I know that. No, for real. If you just walk all the time, you always have a podcast in. That can work sometimes if you want to relax. I would try doing a walk with like a dog or something like that. Just don't have anything, just you and the dog. Maybe train it a little bit or look what it's doing or talk to it or just experience the world of you and that dog and just doing the walk and the smells and the sights and where you're going to. It's a different type of attention you'll notice you give in that sense. I would even say when you eat a meal, don't just listen to the podcast. try and really savor the flavor and think about what the flavor is. And if someone made it for you, think about the energy and time they put into that and the love they put into that. And think about, like, even if you don't like this aspect, how does it complement with this? And how does it go? That's a fun thing to do. It's to develop your appreciation, to build it up in that regard. Similarly, when you talk to someone, it's one of the reasons I think I'm the best talk show host and interviewer. I don't just tune out, whatever. Oh, anyway, yeah, I think Perks. I'm listening to you. I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So do you mean that? And then I come back, right, since you say that, then what about, I'm listening to what you're saying. And that takes time. You have to build that up. Initially, you can only do it like 10 minutes, 5 minutes at a time. You build it up. Eventually, you can do hours at a time, like I do if you know what you're doing. So remember, intuit. Don't grasp or cling to a meaning. Just let it come and then let it go as well and see what sticks and what remains. Spirit Mano says, what are some of your favorite albums you've heard for the first time recently? Right, some of these I'm going to skew it a little bit because I'm not someone who's like spamming music like I used to 15, 20 years ago. Like I have a lot I like and a lot built up already. So I tend to like to re-listen to a lot of stuff and then I gradually introduce new stuff like by people I know, complimentary artists. I'm not as heavy into it as I was before. So in terms of like purely new stuff, like a lot of it would be like obscure 70s, like funk and prog rock bands that I just find via the YouTube algo, and I just listen to the whole thing. And a lot of them, I can barely even remember them because it's not one of those ones where I've looked at every track. It's just like I'll put them on the background when I'm working. It's the theme tune of doing the work. But I've got some I can give you here. I've looked back through my collection. Remember, I'm not someone who's follows the latest trends either. I go throughout all the time on movies and histories and books. I read it and get into it when I'm into it. So one would be the classic 90s rapper Mace, the one with the dollar sign that was with Puff Daddy and all those guys. His album Harlem World. Like, I used to think this guy was a meme because people sort of made fun of him in the hip hop community, like the way he bailed out and the way he went religious and stuff. This album is a banger. A banger. Like, this album, for real, this guy should have been the heir to Biggie Smalls. I can see why Puffy was fucking with him. This album is one of the all-time great rap hip-hop albums. It's really good. You'll just have to get into it, but like his style, it reminds me of Biggie as well. Doesn't have to rhyme in that way. He's just got that flow, and he can keep like looping things and putting them on top of each other and keep a sick little angle going where he keeps you in the groove. Oh, it's really good. It's really good. This guy could have been so much better. Probably one of the most wasted talents ever. In terms of modern day stuff, I would say the second Donda album by Kanye or Ye. I just think he's one of those guys where it's funny, the period a lot of people bailed, they only like his earlier stuff, which I thought was his worst stuff ever, is when he became experimental, right? But I think it's yielded some incredible stuff. Like, I genuinely think this guy is an artistic genius. I think his mind just works in a different way to other people. So I think it's a banger personally. Some amazing features on there. The styles of it, the fact it has some sort of like, he can simultaneously have like religious elements, like the hard elements, like rap elements, like things about his personal. He can do the whole gamut. He's too good. No one in hip hop's really fucking with that guy right now. Then for drum and bass, there was one the last few years, which was if you already know Dom and Roland as like early 2000s, late 90s, like, I was an old school guy, mate. If you don't know, in the last like decade and a half, he started leveling his game up, and Dom and Roland's one of the few old school acts. It's really just a guy called Dom, by the way. Roland was like obviously the sampler or synthesizer or whatever. It's a guy who normally those guys are stuck in their way rather. This guy actually was able to level up to the new styles, and this album he did, Last Refuge of a Scoundrel, it is a mad return to form. Like, I love it when the OGs adapt to the new era. It's a bit like if you know battle rap, you'll know this reference. Thesaurus in the modern day of King of the Dot is right back to being one of the all-time best. But he had that period where he was goated at the beginning in the grind time and the sort of like the Scribble Jam era. And then he had that period where he was just he wasn't at the same level as the top pick. He was still just doing like all those fucking like cool multis or whatever. But his game just got better and better over the years, and he was able to also level up. So I'd say it's like that. It's a really good drum and bass album. Some really banging tracks. The first time you hear some of them, you'll be into it if you're into drum and bass. There was the more recent Burial release, which is the Anti-Dawn EP. If you like the modern day Burial stuff, which I think is incredible, where they're like the 10-12 minute songs with like emotional elements that go into and out of 2 or 3 different genres and have techno elements and house elements and fucking drum and bass elements, this has got some great tracks. Just start with the first track, and then even though this last one doesn't really work, it's not the first time I heard it, but in the context that, like, I never appreciated this album before, it is almost like the first time I heard it with new ears. Because in the last year or so, I actually got into Metallica. Like, I don't just listen to bands and go, oh, great. Like, some of them don't speak to me at first. At certain points in my life, depending on what other stuff, but then suddenly they key in and start getting interesting. And when I was listening to all of Metallica, look, let's be real, the first 3 or 4 albums are all the best, of course. But when you're listening to those ones, right, yeah, the first albums, like, some of them have like some amazing, like, oh, this 2 or 3 tracks here, or this track here is insane, but I'll probably skip that one, or that was just okay, and that solo wasn't that good on that one. Yeah, listen, if I had to say like my favourite album, It might be Ride the Lightning for some of the tracks, but if I actually had to say the best Metallica album, I don't think it's a cliche. I used to, because I think this album, by the way, actually gets underrated because of fucking Enter Sandman, which has been overplayed to fuck at all the sporting events, hasn't it? But actually, that's probably my least favourite track on that's not one I really listen to that much. Similar, Nothing Else Matters. Like, they're not my favourite tracks. This album, all in all, I think it's a banger. I think it's one of the best albums ever. And by the way, anyone who says all that shit, look, I get it if you're a Dave Mustaine fan or Stan, but anyone who says, oh, you know what? Like, actually, the guitarist, he isn't really that good, is he, Cliff? Like, no, that's Cliff, the fucking Kurt, whatever. Mate, if this guy isn't fucking amazing at his craft in terms of the solos and what he does, I don't know what you want from music like this, mate. This guy, these are some of the best ones ever. Like, some of these tracks, it's just him, mate. He's the best. I mean, I don't know why Metallica fans are all just fucking star fuckers for James Hetfield. I don't get it myself. Like, yeah, he has some catchy little fucking like riffs and stuff. His voice can be good, yeah. I think the Kurt guy's a fucking beast, mate. So this album is insane. I think this album's really, really, really good. It's actually the tracks that don't get played that are the best ones, like sort of 2 to 5 or 6, right? Pacey, is there any worship gospel music that speaks to your soul specifically? I mean, there is, in the sense that, like, I have listened in the modern day when I got more into like icons and things. I have listened to like Gregorian chant and certain like Orthodox, but the problem is I don't know the artists or what the names of the tracks are, or if they're in Latin or some shit. So in terms of, I'll sort of cheat, but I'll give you a real one. In the modern day, the stuff that Kanye did since he became Christian, right? The Jesus is King album or whatever it was. He even did those like Sunday services. Like, I would look up, I'll maybe link it here. They're like Can't Tell Me Nothing freestyle that he turned into a gospel thing. That stuff just speaks to me in a way. Like, it's powerful. Yeah, it's more than just music, certainly. Although I would say that's because people have devalued music and made music the shittest thing music can be. It's supposed to be this incredibly powerful thing. Remember, back in the day, if you were some like peasant type guy and you went into a church, an enormous cathedral to the sky, everyone else was on the one ground floor. This thing like this, it doesn't even look like it could have ever been built by anyone even closely related to you, your people. And of course, that has to be God's house. You go in, it's full of gold and colours and fucking stained glass windows and architecture and symbology, and you, oh my God, it would be overwhelming. And then you hear an organ, and you hear the music. You would be in another world, mate. You wouldn't even believe it was your life. You'd think that would be like taking LSD or something in the modern day. Everything would be all over, all this input coming out of nowhere. So I think people have actually devalued music, sadly. Scott K, I have taken on board your suggestion to read C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. Check out the Charles Carroll interviews. Are there any other works of his you would extol to the same extent? The obvious one, mentioned on Return by the Numbers many times, is the Screwtape Letters. The basic premise is it's like a demon writing letters to his nephew on how to like ensnare men and what you do to turn them away from God and life and happiness. Essentially, when you read it, it's satirical, and you'll find it's sort of what's going on in life now. And the joke is, when it was written, it was one of those mega prescient things. Now it's insane. You'd think it was written like 5 years ago. You'll be shocked. And it's a quick read as well. It's a fun read. SZ0. Who would you recommend reading/listening to after Terence McKenna, or further succeeded in his work? Ooh. Well, this goes hand in hand, because one thing I would say is this. If you love Terence McKenna, you used to be well into him. I've heard every talk he's done, unless someone released one in the last year or something, many, many times. I had an insane collection of his stuff once. I've read every book he's done. I've been really deep on that shit. But here's the problem. Don't make him a god. Don't make him a hero. Don't make him perfect. Don't think everything he said was the best. Because here's the problem. You want to know the breadth of who he was, right? If you really want to interpret what he said beyond the stuff that just works without needing his personality. So I would say also, look into his past first. You might be surprised. Like, for example, you can look into this. There's a period in something like the 90s or late 80s where it's even admitted, but it wasn't known until he was dead, that he stopped taking psychedelics. He didn't take big doses. He would very rarely take a DMT, or very rarely even take mushrooms. He'd sort of like gone to a point where it scared him and it put him off. But the whole time, he was still going and giving talks and talking about 5 dry grams and courage to do it. And this is if every politician could just sit down and do this stuff, how it would change the world, and how art, and let's push the art pedal to the front. Listen, it was all great advice. It just wasn't his advice anymore. He didn't live that advice anymore. And some of that's a bit dodgy. I think maybe it got a bit too comfortable. I think maybe those gigs at Essalon got a bit too nice. I think at some point in time, the money, the acclaim, he was becoming the new Timothy Leary. Oh, is he going to admit that? Oh, I don't really do this shit anymore, to be honest. I just mainly smoke weed if I'm a bit... No, he didn't. And I you know me, I can't fuck with that. Now, here's the thing. A key principle I have is you'll never see me generally talk shit on Jordan Peterson, Christopher Hitchens, Terence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, these people, you'll never hear me just go like, I've dismissed them all. I've sort of transcended them completely. I've taken everything they had. For a while, it was good. That's like that's little boy shit. That's trying to overcome your dad intellectually. No. Those people took me a certain way along a path. Might not be the path I'm still on, but along a path. They did teach me things. They opened the door things. And I will always be grateful for that. And I will always respect that. And because I respect that and the value they did have in my life, I don't just issue them completely. And I certainly don't kick them to the curb. I actually show them a level of respect as though they were a mentor of mine. They're essentially a remote mentor. And so because they're a mentor of mine, I show them that respect. And I try not to meme on them. And I try not to point out to Jordan Peterson that if he's talking about a certain medical thing, homie, weren't you the one telling people to do that? I don't do that. I don't do that. That was just an example. So one other thing I'll say, and I have to be very careful on this, but it'll tie into someone else you can look into, is I'm sorry, I've looked into the whole thing. I told you I was a huge fan. I am in some ways. I'll still go back and listen to stuff, and I still think he has great ideas and great quotes, a very eloquent person. I think he was likely an operative. Like, the short version is, if you notice the story, go and look up in the 70s of why he couldn't be in the USA at one point in time. And then look at the idea of and then years later, they just sort of dropped everything and I could just come back and I'm here again. And what do you know? I'm at all these places started by intelligence operative think tank. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that easy. Just like his boy Timothy Leary, it ain't that easy, mate. That's a comic book storyline as to how you got back in. How do you really do it, mate? What deal did you really cut? Hey? Because one thing I'll say is, even though you might love all the stuff, the psychedelic stuff, I'll tell you one thing he was pushing mega hard those last years. The idea that the planet is dying, we've ruined the world, and that we need to escape the planet because we can't stay here and live. Wait a minute, mate. That's the message you would get from powerful psychs. Which ones? Not mushrooms. Not fucking ayahuasca. They tell you heal the earth. They tell you ignore bullshit and things and politicians moving numbers to say this is going up and the sea's going to... No, how do we return to how things were in a past age that was this type of climate? How do we learn? You know what I mean? There's so many dodgy things there. There's so many brilliant things, but everyone is flawed, and he was very flawed in these ways. So I would say if you want to look into some of that stuff of the operative angle and some... How about looking up a guy called Jan Irvin. He's a really interesting guy. Listen, he's wacky in his own way. He's an LS type character. He definitely has his own crazy idiosyncrasies and he has his own weird aspects to him. But first of all, little thing, as far as I remember hearing, he's the guy who actually turned Joe Rogan on psychedelics, by the way. But he also is someone you will never see on Joe Rogan again. If you ever look up the appearance he went on, it's very interesting how Joe Rogan treated one of his mentors and how he sort of fucking did this guy dirty. So I would just say, look into this guy. He's got some interesting angles on some of these things you probably haven't thought of. And he's certainly willing to ask bigger questions in some regards. So I would say generally, when you ask it, there are other people, look, I'll give you one. I won't be rude, but I'll say it's a bit of a lazy question. Because you know what? If you listen to a lot of Terence McKenna and read a lot of Terence McKenna, well, what you'll love is he gives a million references to his work, right? And other things you can go read from. And also citations. And let's be real, in his talks, he might be the person who references books and works and people more than anyone ever because he has an amazing memory for it. So if you just go back and listen, you'll be able to do it. Some people just want to get high and listen, draw it on or tell a cool story or be very eloquent and use words they don't know and they're not listening. Yeah, but it's already out there. So first of all, I remember on the Psychedelic Salon, which had loads of his content in the modern day, they used to even sometimes list the books that he referenced or the people that he referenced. There was also a library he used to have that got burned down. There's a list of all the books that were there. There's even a search engine. I'll put it in the description if I remember. And there's a recommended list of books. There's all that stuff for that stuff. So I would just say go look that up. That's what you want to do. Similarly, if you want to know what Alan Moore's about, he's done a recommended reading list once online. If you want to know what Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy, they go search reading list online, see what they say. Because there are other people. I'll just say I'm not as interested in that area as I once was. But I will say actually, in the modern day, if you want someone who's actually a bit in the vein of Terence McKenna in terms of some of it, check out that guy who did On It with Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus. He has some interesting angles. Listen, he has his own flaws, and there are certainly aspects where you might think he's a bit cheesy or whatever, but I think some of it's genuine. I think he's got an authenticity to him. Right, ppnomula, who was someone I very much appreciate, was one of my main supporters on this new side channel. Hi, Thorin. Is, in your opinion, it's not that deep, bro. A psyop / diversion tactic when it in reality often is that deep. Thanks for the content, especially Thor inquiries with Charles and others. It is both, innit? Because that's how layers work in reality. That's how reality works. It is layered. So I think it's based on your perception. That'll tell you if it's deep or if it's just something nothing, right? I think it's about that thing I always bring up. It's about models and lenses. What model are you in? What lens are you in? Maybe something isn't important here. It's the most important thing here. Maybe it's pretty important here and it's getting really important in a different... you cross the board. So I think in life, you have to be able to zoom in and zoom out. You have to have a telescope, you have to have a microscope, and you have to be able to see normally as well. And you have to live your life. When you live your life and have experiences, you can then contrast them with things you thought, how you modeled, what lens you were looking at. You can then change lenses and models to get more out of something or to explore it further. I think most stuff in life is distraction. It is nonsense. And there's a lot of psyops and diversion tactics. But how you live your life daily with your family is the most important thing in the world. It's not who's elected, what's going on in a war, what's the economy, what's going on with this, like, are they going to do this next? I've heard this thing. Oh my God, did you see what happened in this outreach? Did you see what the police are doing? Do you see what's happening with this drug overdose over here? Have you seen what this sports team? Those are all frivolous things. You can choose to make them the most important thing and go into them, but I would never do it at the expense of your life with your family and how you're living your life, your principles, what you enjoy, what your experiences are. That's the thing you don't want to get distracted from, because that is your life. That is what life is, right? Jordan, I've been a fan of yours for a couple of years, and I know you speak about working on your broadcast skills. One thing I've noticed is that you've developed listening skills, things like nodding or giving a well-timed verbal agreement. Is this something that you have had to practice, or did it just happen over time? Well, here's the thing, Jordan. You don't even need to ask me that question, mate, because fair play, you can't. I'll answer it now. I have an enormous archive of thousands of videos online. You can go back and look. Now, true, you can't go back to like 2003 or 2009. So that's unfortunate. You can't go back to SK Game and see how I've leveled up. But you can even go to 2013 or 2014. You can see my first League of Legends one. You'll see how I start as just a guy doing a lot of research, some good questions. I develop over time, and especially my talk shows, that may be an incredible conversation, because I've had thousands and thousands of convos. I've had loads of guests of all different types, different backgrounds, men, women, all over, everything you can imagine. So I would just say, yeah, I've worked on it a lot. It's something I practice tons. I mean, the joke is a lot of my practice is public. I do it as I'm doing it now. It didn't just happen. Nothing just happens. Things are made to happen. Nivolo, and this is going to be the last question. My interest in esports has dropped the last year or two. By the way, that's one of the reasons I've done this podcast, this side Patreon. But I still tune into the talk shows to keep up with you. Will be fun to see the Last Free Nation brand develop. I was wondering a few things about personal relationships. How important is friendship with people you work with? Do you need to trust someone to work with them? What are some red flags that you learned over the years to look out for in people, certain qualities, etc.? I think being friends, in the sense that people are going to take it, is mega overrated. It's absurdly overrated. Because here's what they mistake. You don't know if me and Monty are actually friends beyond me telling you and him telling you we are. For all you know, and there have been people like this in esports, maybe on camera we're straight fire. Me and Richard were like this for a few years. But then the second the show's over, see you, mate, hang up the call, never talking privately, aside from that. Just two people living their own lives, nothing against the guy, but we do our shows, we do our work on the day. That can happen. The rapport was always great, right? Rapport isn't the same as friendship, and you'll get tricked by that on camera. You'll think they must be best pals, or people in the game play well, have teamwork, they must love each other. I think it's like this. You don't want to take your friend who's a fellow pro player and play with him, because then, if he plays like shit or it's inappropriate, the fact is your friend's going to kill you. What you want to do is play with people, find the people that are good to play with and work with you, and maybe develop a friendship with one or two of them to make it cooler and raise the morale and get some rapport going friendship-wise. In terms of red flags, I mean, the first one to me would be being disloyal. People who, when you're meeting them initially, they badmouth their friends, their family, their colleagues. What do you think they're saying about you when you're not around, when there are other friends there? Generally, people like that, it's so base. There's something about that I can't fuck with, you know. I would say if they're dishonest, if you find them being dishonest, because people will go like, oh, but you know, like everyone does. No, I don't. And also, why do you have to? You never have to. So in that scenario, what you'll find is people who are dishonest, spoiler, yeah, you can't trust them in almost anything at that point in time, right? Well, now what can I bloody believe you said? You don't always have to be right. You don't have to be correct, but be honest. I would then say a massive one is people who don't accept responsibility. It's not that they make a mistake. Everyone can make a mistake. If you fuck up, fine. You say, right, I copped to it. I made a mistake. I messed up. I take responsibility for it. I'll do it again. I'm sorry. I can't deliver this. You don't go like, I didn't do it, but it wasn't my fault because of X, Y, and Z. And also, like, why should I do that anyway? And who are you to tell me to do that? And I'll get it done eventually. Get run from people like that. Because what about when you need to rely on that person? And then also, the last one is people who are just arrogant without even being good at anything. Like, if I have arrogance, usually, by the way, you're misinterpreting it. I'm just excellent at what I do and I've put in decades. Why the fuck wouldn't I be hella confident? Why wouldn't I think I'm the best? I've even proven it on the battlefield time and time again. That isn't arrogance, mate. That's earned. That's a fucking mentality. That's confidence. That's real confidence. So I would say, think about it. Let's go through briefly what type of a person we'd have if you missed these red flags. They'd be someone who isn't loyal, isn't honest, doesn't accept responsibility, and is just a bit of an arsehole and thinks they're better than everyone for no good reason. They're the people you don't want to be around, no matter how cool they were when you were 12, no matter that they like the same team and movie and comic and game as you, or the fact that they're the same age and live in the same city as you. Mate, sometimes I'd rather be on my own than those people. I remember that classic quote, like, one of the worst things that like a bore does is deny you companionship without giving you like peace or something, or like solitude or something, you know. You don't even get to just be on your own and enjoy your thought. You have some arseholes fucking annoying you. So yeah, that's what I would say. Right, obviously, took me a while to get this one going. Next one's going to be much, much quicker. The second you see this, if you're one of my patrons, by the way, if you're a patron who unsubbed since then or left the tier to ask questions, you can still ask a question for the last 2 months. Contact me, hit me up through Patreon, send me your question. I will ask it here, I will answer it here, and we'll get into it. The next one's going to be way quicker. Let's get back on track. This year is going to bang.
Here on my side channel, I of course explore my non-esports interests, but the increased amount of videos that I'm able to put out and about however many topics is in large part thanks to the following people: ppnomula, Realm. Now, do you want to choose the topic that I focus on next out of a series of them? Maybe you want to ask a question for my next AMA. There'll be a thread coming real soon after the first one. Would you like teasers to find out who the upcoming guests are for Thor Inquiry? Maybe you want to take part in a private, never-to-be-published discussion with yours truly. Well, if so, then heed this call to action and join Thor Inside today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box below.